Belinda's all kindness and tears, saying nice words but with sadness.
I'm employed by a local authority, and there is an issue around kind of having my name associated with that authority, and also talking about true crime. That's the only reason.
Was trying to understand why this baby, like what happened to her, like why was she so weak? That's what she was thinking, that she doesn't have this connection to Layla, where the other two, it didn't happen with the other two. So it really confused her, and that just added to what was already going on, right?
Yeah. I think that's a common description that I've heard. I haven't experienced it, but I have dealt with a lot of families who have been impacted by it.
Darren, he's blunt, calls it like he sees it.
And I asked him, listen, if you were out in the driveway with Malaya and the kids, and you knew that the kids never went in the woods, you knew that Malaya had shuffled them off, why were you telling all the press, why were you telling everybody that you were searching through the woods, right? And he said, I still loved Malaya, and I was trying to cover for her life.
And Daniel, he talks just enough to make himself look clean.
It's a lot of nonsense, obviously. I know the truth. I didn't kill Lilly and Jack. And I just think a lot of people online they're seeking drama, that's the main thing. Everybody's allowed their own opinion, like I said before, but it's hard on the people that were actually there and missing the children.
They've all said a lot about what they did, about what they didn't do. But the one thing they agree on, pointing the finger at Malaya, the mother, the only one who stayed completely silent, no interviews, no explanations. So here's the question. Is the truth in all we've heard, or buried in what they're not telling us? The parts of themselves they don't want anyone to see. Cody Sullivan. In her appearances on various live streams and interviews, Belinda Gray, mother of Cody Sullivan, spoke candidly about her son's life, his past relationship with Malaya Brook-Murray, and his emotional state following the disappearance of Jack and Lilly. Her words painted a picture of a man who had made mistakes, yes, but who was neither a criminal nor a danger. He hasn't been out west. He has no criminal record. She stated firmly that he's been living with her for the past 11 months, dismissing speculation that Cody might have been involved in anything nefarious related to the children's disappearance. According to Belinda, Cody had no direct contact with Jack or Lilly in the 3 years leading up to the incident. His absence from their lives, while painful in hindsight, was not sudden or secretive. It was the result of a fractured relationship and personal setbacks that followed. Cody and Malaya were together for 3.5 years. But things deteriorated quickly after Jack was born. Belinda recalled that she just wasn't happy anymore. She just wanted out of the relationship. Belinda emphasized that it was Malaya who ended things, and she respected that decision. I supported that, she added plainly. There was no mention of a fight, no accusations of abuse, no dramatic split, at least, not from Belinda's point of view. However, she did acknowledge that her son didn't handle the breakup well. Cody turned to alcohol and drugs. He started to lose control of his life. He lost his job, lost his house, lost his car. That's why he came back to live with me. For Belinda, that descent wasn't something she was proud of, but neither was it something she would deny. I'm not making excuses for him. But he is my son, and I love him. She drew a line between bad personal choices and criminal behavior. Her defense of Cody was rooted in that nuance. He was struggling, but he wasn't dangerous. She believed that wholeheartedly. Despite the emotional and financial collapse, Cody continued to pay child support until about 11 months before the children went missing. That's when everything fell apart for him. According to Belinda, he tried to stay responsible, even as his life was unraveling. There was no indication from her that he ever tried to interfere with Malaya's custody, or reach out to the children once she took full parental control. He simply disappeared from that chapter of their lives. And while that might raise questions for some, Belinda didn't see it as suspicious. She saw it as a man, her son, trying to survive. On the lastest livestream, Belinda was asked point blank whether Cody had any other children besides Jack and Lily. She answered directly, yes, he does. No names were mentioned. No details about the other child's mother, living arrangement, or relationship status. Just a quiet confirmation. The disappearance of Jack and Lily hit Cody hard, even though he hadn't seen them in years. According to Belinda, he was devastated. Unless he's just soulless, this would hurt him, and I don't believe he's that kind of man. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't emotional in the performative way people sometimes expect. But there was something resolute in her words. A need to draw a line between pain and guilt, between falling apart and being a suspect. What was perhaps most striking about Belinda's testimony was the lack of hostility. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't point fingers. She didn't suggest that her son had been wronged or victimized. She just wanted people to understand that he wasn't the villain. He's not hiding. He's not hiding. He's not running. And notably, no one in those live streams, neither the hosts nor the viewers, ever implied that Cody might have had anything to do with Jack and Lily's disappearance. The suspicion simply wasn't there. Still, the shadows linger. There are claims from other sources, particularly from Daniel Martell and Darren Gettys, that Malaya may have been suffering from severe PSD following her relationship with Cody. It has even been hinted that she was afraid of him. That kind of fear raises difficult questions. Questions about what really happened behind closed doors. Questions Belinda didn't address, or perhaps didn't know how to answer. And here's where the issue becomes even more pressing. Cody's history of substance abuse should be more detailed. The fact that he began drinking heavily and using drugs after the relationship ended, as Belinda openly admitted, is telling. It shows a man unraveling emotionally and mentally. But it also begs the question, what was his mental state before the split? If his descent started after losing contact with the children, what behaviors might have already been present? These aren't just character flaws. They point to instability. And instability matters, especially when the custody of children is at stake. Belinda was clear that Malaya left because she was unhappy and that she supported her decision. But CPS doesn't revoke custody simply because a partner is sad or tired of a relationship. For Cody to be denied parental rights, for the state to intervene and remove him entirely from his children's lives, the reasons were likely deeper, more serious, perhaps harder to say out loud, and possibly much harder to accept. And then there's another question. One that keeps hovering just beneath the surface. Why was Jack's birth the turning point? Belinda herself mentioned that things went downhill right after Jack was born. That timing matters. Was it just the stress of parenting? Was it a change in behavior from Cody? These are not small questions. If the birth of a child marked the beginning of a relationship's collapse, it suggests that something foundational, something critical, broke at that moment. One of the most common scenarios in these cases is that the mother may have experienced postpartum depression, but didn't receive the support she needed. Maybe she was left to face it alone. Maybe she was emotionally abandoned. With the growing questions about Cody's personality, his instability, and his detachment, this becomes not just a possibility, but a credible one. The kind of silent suffering that goes unnoticed until it becomes unbearable. But from Belinda's side of the story, Cody Sullivan was a man who spiraled after heartbreak, who returned to his mother's home in defeat, and who, when his children vanished, was left with nothing but silence and shame. He wasn't perfect, and Belinda never claimed he was. But in her eyes, he wasn't a danger. He was just lost. Daniel Martell. Daniel was Malaya's boyfriend, the mother of the missing children, Jack and Lily. He lived with her and the kids in a small RV, the edge of the woods, before everything happened. After the disappearance, Daniel continued raising Malaya's youngest daughter, Meadow, and quickly became one of the most talked about figures in this case, not just by family, but by the entire internet. Right from the start, Daniel was the first person to speak out publicly. He posted videos, went on live streams, and shared emotional messages asking for help. But there was something off. Both Belinda, the children's grandmother, and Darren noticed that Daniel rarely said Jack or Lily's names. Instead, he kept talking about his own pain, his own confusion, as if the spotlight had somehow shifted from the missing kids to him. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Still, Daniel's behavior raised red flags. Belinda said she messaged him several times, as the grandmother of the missing kids, and he read her messages but never replied. She couldn't understand it. If he truly had nothing to hide, why ignore her? Why keep her at arm's length? That's not normal. Daniel has never been charged. He's never been named an official suspect. But in the eyes of the public and even some family members, he's still one of the most suspicious people involved, not because of proof, but because of how he acted. Avoidant. Vague. Hard to read. In a case where the truth is buried, sometimes silence speaks louder than guilt. Belinda's public appearance and her opinion about Daniel marked one of the very few instances where someone who actually knew him offered a personal assessment. Until then, most of what the public knew about Daniel had come from Malaya's side of the story, and, more recently, from Darren Gettys. Belinda's perspective offered a rare, first-hand emotional lens, and it made her distrust all the more significant. In Belinda's perspective, she never outright accused Daniel of harming her grandchildren, Jack and Lily. But from the beginning, she made it clear she didn't trust him. She said, "If Daniel is telling the truth, then he should have no problem talking to me, the grandmother of Jack and Lily." That was her stance. She wasn't asking for much, just basic respect, a conversation, an acknowledgement that they shared a common bond of grief. But Daniel never reached out. Belinda had messaged him multiple times. He read them. He didn't respond. And to her, that silence wasn't neutral, it was cruel. It told her something wasn't right. That maybe he was hiding something. Or maybe he just didn't care. As what the outsiders like us felt, after the children disappeared, Daniel's behavior on social media only fueled her suspicion. She watched as he posted videos on media, not pleading for help, not crying for his kids, but talking about himself. Again and again, his tone wasn't that of a desperate father. It was calculated, performed, hollow. He rarely even mentioned Jack or Lily by name. Belinda saw someone more obsessed with how he was being perceived than with actually finding the children. She used the word self-absorbed to describe him. And it wasn't said in passing, it was pointed. It was angry. It was disappointed. She noticed the contradiction between the person he portrayed online and how he treated her personally. While she made herself available, open, even vulnerable, Daniel responded with nothing. No call. No text. Not even a message of condolence. He acted like she didn't exist. And yet, there he was, on live streams, interviews, videos, telling the world he would search for his kids forever if he had to. Belinda didn't buy it. If he truly felt that way, why wasn't he talking to the woman who raised their mother? Why wasn't he asking questions? Why wasn't he looking in the eyes of those who loved Jack and Lily most? To Belinda, it felt like he was putting on a show, always repeating the same lines, word for word, in every interview. She met him in person once. What struck her most wasn't what he said, but how rehearsed it sounded. Like a script. The same phrases, the same tone, as if he'd memorized it. That terrified her. A real father wouldn't speak like that. A real father would shake, cry, fall apart. But Daniel, he kept the act tight. Controlled. Almost too perfect. She also had doubts that stretched beyond just him. At one point, Malaya texted Daniel, "Why aren't you out there looking for my kids?" To Belinda, that message shattered the theory that Daniel might have killed them. Because if Malaya really believed he had, why would she say something like that? Why would she challenge him in that way? It didn't make sense. unless there was something more complicated. Something not being said. Belinda wasn't just reacting emotionally, she was watching, listening, remembering. She remembered Daniel once mentioning he'd found a torn-up blue blanket in the garbage. He said it might have been from a bear. That kind of detail bothered her. It felt strange. Random. And then there was another thing. Daniel said Malaya's mom had called the school at 6:18 in the morning, the day everything happened. That exact time. Belinda couldn't shake the feeling that something had been planned. Or covered up. She also talked about Daniel's personality. She saw him as immature, not ready for the responsibility he claimed. Sometimes men are big kids, and they don't really grow up until they're 35. She said with half in frustration, half in truth. She found out he had a Pokemon channel. Again, something that seemed harmless on the surface. But to her just reinforced the idea that he wasn't equipped for the kind of crisis unfolding around him. Throughout the entire ordeal, she kept circling back to one idea. If Daniel had nothing to hide, why wasn't he acting like a man with nothing to hide? She wasn't asking him to confess. She was asking him to care. She was asking him to show up, not online, but in real life. To pick up the phone. To knock on her door. To look her in the eye and say, "I'm doing everything I can." But he never did. On livestream, Belinda spoke directly to him. Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't hesitate. If you're innocent, speak. If you're protecting someone, stop. If you're scared, I understand. But silence is not helping the kids. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. A grandmother begging for the truth, not for herself, but for the two little faces that haunted her every night. Belinda wasn't naive. She knew people lied. She knew grief looked different for everyone. But what she couldn't accept was the distance. The quiet. The inconsistency. She believed if Daniel truly loved Jack and Lily, then he would have moved mountains to find them. Instead, he drifted. Away from the family. Away from the truth. And for her, that was unforgivable. From Darren's side, he had his own perspective, shaped by years of personal ties and lived experience. And when you look at his background and the connections he shares with both families, it's not hard to see why his insights about Daniel carry a certain weight. Darren is Malaya's second cousin. Their families are connected through a web of complicated ties, stepfathers, shared bloodlines, and indigenous heritage. He spoke openly about how their family trees crisscross in ways that are messy and hard to explain, but still real. He remembers Malaya growing up surrounded by other girls her age, some of whom were also semi-related, through blood or blended family ties. Darren's connection to Daniel was more distant, but still personal. His own son had once worked with Daniel, and Darren himself had known members of Daniel's family, James, Alvin, and Earl, for many years. Daniel's father, Alvin, was someone Darren recognized as part of the local web of relationships he's been tied into his whole life. Darren also shares deep roots in the region, including ties to the indigenous community. He mentioned being related to the Patty Allen family and other people in Toro. His native ancestry isn't just something in his bloodline, it's part of his worldview. It shapes his strong belief that Jack and Lily are still alive and being cared for by someone from that community. He declared that 99% of the kids are with natives. This belief wasn't based on wishful thinking alone. Darren said he received information from a confidential source, someone he claimed was directly involved in everything from start to finish. He was so confident in this person's credibility that he promised to expose them publicly if their claims turned out to be false. He even said he cross-checked what they told him with other witnesses, other sources. Darren's conviction wasn't casual. It came from knowing people, places, and histories in a way only someone local could. About Daniel, Darren didn't always believe what he believes now. In fact, he was one of the first people to suspect Daniel after Jack and Lily disappeared. Not because of any personal grudge, far from it. It was because his family pointed him in that direction. I had to go after Daniel, Darren said during one of his live streams. My family wanted me to. That's where they wanted me to look. So he did. He spent 3 weeks digging, talking to people, revisiting every statement Daniel made online and off, cross-checking details, trying to connect dots that might reveal something ugly. But after those 3 weeks, something shifted. Darren looked into everything he could find on Daniel, and, in his words, "Everything I found pointed me away from Daniel." The deeper he looked, the more he realized there was no hard evidence that Daniel was responsible for anything. No smoking gun. No real contradiction that couldn't be explained. Just a guy who looked bad on camera, and had said some things that didn't sit right. But that wasn't enough. Darren came to a decision: he was done blaming someone, just because it felt convenient. He's not a monster. As he worded, he's not what you think. That shift in Darren's position didn't come easy. He risked being labeled a flip-flopper, a liar, even a traitor by people close to him. But he made it clear. He wasn't here to protect anyone. "I'm here to find the truth," he said. "If I get it wrong, I'll own it." Part of Darren's change of aim after Daniel admitted something to him in private. Daniel had lied. Yes. He had made things up during the early days of the investigation. But according to Daniel, the reason wasn't to cover up a crime. It was to protect Malaya. Darren said. "He told me himself, he lied. Not to cover anything up, but to protect her. Because he still loved her." Daniel had been holding on to this hope that maybe, somehow, he and Malaya could work things out, that they could still be a family. That kind of desperate hope blinded him, and he ended up saying things that only hurt him in the long run. To Darren, that didn't make Daniel innocent, but it made him human. Daniel, he said, couldn't accept the possibility that Malaya had anything to do with what happened. He couldn't accept it. He didn't want to believe she had anything to do with it. So he lied. Not because he wanted to mislead the police or cover up evidence, but because he couldn't emotionally deal with the truth. Darren described it as being caught in blind love. A tragic kind of love that didn't protect anyone, but only made things worse for everyone involved. Eventually, though, that illusion broke. Darren said Daniel is no longer standing with Malaya. He's not trying to protect her. He chose his daughter, Meadow. He walked away from Malaya completely. That, for Darren, was a crucial turning point. It showed Daniel had moved on from fantasy and was trying to do right by at least one of his children. Darren also spoke a lot about Daniel's emotional state, not to excuse him, but to explain him. He's not built for this, Darren said. He wasn't ready for this kind of trauma. Daniel, in his view, isn't someone who thrives under or rises up when tragedy hits. He shuts down. He collapses inward. That's why, Darren says, Daniel didn't fight back when people started accusing him. He doesn't fight back. He just kind of shuts down. That behavior, being silent, hesitant, uncomfortable, made Daniel look more suspicious. But according to Darren, it was just how he dealt with trauma. It wasn't guilt. It was paralysis. To explain the failures to connect with people like Belinda, the grandmother of Jack and Lily, Daniel didn't answer her messages. Didn't show up, didn't reach out. That hurt her. Understandably, Darren offered a softer take. He wasn't avoiding her out of guilt. He just didn't know what to say. Daniel wasn't malicious, he was overwhelmed. Overall, Belinda and Darren both came into the situation with heavy doubts about Daniel. But over time, their perspectives began to shift, and in very different ways. For Belinda, her initial reaction was one of instinctive mistrust. She was uncomfortable with how Daniel handled himself, particularly the fact that he didn't reach out to her, the grandmother of the missing children, and that he rarely mentioned Jack and Lily by name in public. She stayed emotionally distant, holding on to her suspicion, and she hasn't moved far from that stance. Her concerns revolve around Daniel's lack of visible grief and his failure to make direct contact with the family. For her, that silence speaks volumes. She wants him to speak up, to be transparent, to say something that feels real. Darren, on the other hand, began from a place of intense suspicion as well, encouraged by his own family to look closely at Daniel. He admits that he did. But after 3 weeks of personally investigating, talking to people, and reviewing Daniel's actions, Darren's view shifted. He discovered that Daniel had lied in the early days, not to cover up a crime, but to protect Malaya because he still had feelings for her. While Darren doesn't excuse the lies, he sees them as emotionally driven, not malicious. As a result, Darren has grown more sympathetic. He no longer sees Daniel as a threat. Instead, he believes Daniel is now focused on protecting his daughter Meadow, and that shift in priorities is what changed Darren's opinion. In the end, while both Belinda and Darren started from a similar place of suspicion, their conclusions diverged. Belinda remains guarded and wants answers. Darren has chosen to extend a level of trust, rooted in what he sees as Daniel's emotional unraveling and redirection toward fatherhood. Malaya Brook-Murray. Belinda once had nothing but love and admiration for Malaya. To her, Malaya was the perfect mother, nurturing, attentive, and fully committed to her children. She recalled that Malaya was a doting mother. She was a great mom. I couldn't have been happier to have her as a mom for my grandkids. The early days of their relationship were full of warmth and mutual trust. Belinda welcomed Malaya into the family with open arms and felt reassured, knowing her grandchildren were in good hands. But something began to shift after Malaya met Daniel. Belinda noticed that Malaya's visits, once regular and comforting, began to space out and fade. She'd come every couple of weeks with the kids, and then it slowly dwindled after she met Daniel. Yes, she was changing. It was a slow unraveling that Belinda couldn't fully grasp at the time, but looking back, it marked the beginning of something deeply unsettling. When Jack and Lily disappeared, everything Belinda once believed about Malaya began to crumble. She struggled to reconcile the caring mother she had known with the woman who now seemed to vanish emotionally and physically from the crisis. I cannot see her going through all these lengths to get her kids out of there when she could have left. I just can't see that. It doesn't make sense to me. The woman she had trusted to love and protect her grandchildren had turned into someone she no longer recognized. This is a totally different person that you can't comprehend anymore. Like whatever happened to this other Malaya. Crazy, isn't it? The disbelief was overwhelming. It wasn't just confusion, it was betrayal. Belinda grew increasingly disturbed by Malaya's behavior in the immediate aftermath of the children's disappearance. One thing that haunted her was how detached Malaya seemed, how she never once mentioned Jack or Lily by name in her first public interview. We don't hear Malaya ever, in that first interview, talk about Jack and Lily's name. No sort of stress going on there, and this is the day right after. For Belinda, a grandmother desperate for answers, that absence of urgency, that lack of visible anguish, spoke volumes. I find a lot are not mentioning Jack and Lily specifically. That's what's made it hard, hasn't it, Belinda? Yes. It made everything harder: trust, hope, forgiveness. Her resentment boiled over when she learned about a message Malaya had sent, criticizing Daniel for caring more about what people thought than looking for the kids. To Belinda, that crossed a line. It's like the pot calling the kettle black. You literally have the nerve to say that Malaya and Daniel is the one that's out there regardless of what people think. In Belinda's eyes, Daniel, whatever his flaws, was at least showing up. Malaya was silent, absent, watching from the shadows, if watching at all. Still, Belinda wasn't without empathy. She had walked through hell herself and emerged with scars that taught her how easily a person could lose themselves. She began to consider the possibility that Malaya might have been suffering from postpartum depression. I think Malaya could have it, would definitely explain a lot about her behavior. I still just can't see that she would hurt her kids. Belinda understood that darkness intimately. After her own daughter was born, she had spiraled into a fog of emptiness for a year and a half. It was like, you're supposed to love this little baby, but when it cries and nothing you do helps, you feel like a failure. Like you're not even fit to be a mom. She withdrew. Couldn't connect. Couldn't even interpret her baby's cries. If Malaya was going through something similar, Belinda could understand how the pain might have grown silent and deep. Her daughter had also gone through it. After 2 healthy, happy children, her 3rd baby arrived, and something was just different. She couldn't bond with her the same. She felt weak. She didn't know why she couldn't love her like the others. Belinda saw that mirrored in Malaya's relationship with Meadow. Maybe it wasn't about evil or cruelty. Maybe it was about mental illness. Maybe it was about drowning. She even questioned whether Daniel had worsened Malaya's state of mind, making her feel like a terrible mother, until she began to believe it. If she already felt worthless and someone reinforced that, maybe that's why she started to pull away from everything, even the kids. Still, Belinda emphasized that Malaya never showed signs of postpartum psychosis. There were no hallucinations or delusions. Just emotional deadness. Numbness. That, too, is dangerous. But what hurt most, more than all the confusion and speculation, was the silence. The complete, agonizing absence of contact. The last contact I had with Malaya was the morning that she took off with Meadow, and she hasn't even looked at my texts. Belinda had tried everything. She messaged, called, and waited. Eventually, Malaya's Facebook was deactivated. Belinda was blocked on Messenger. She asked a friend to try contacting Malaya instead. A response came back, but it didn't sound like Malaya at all. The message said, "If Belinda wants to know I'm safe with Meadow, or about her grandchildren, she should contact the RCMP." It was cold. Formal. Not like her. Malaya never referred to her kids as your grandchildren. She always said, my babies. Belinda suspected Cindy, Malaya's mother, wrote it on her behalf. There were whispers of Malaya's voice during a phone call with Cindy, faint and distant, like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Maybe I wasn't allowed to. That tiny sound, that half murmur, was the last thread Belinda held on to. The only proof Malaya was even still there, somewhere inside. And despite everything, despite being shut out, accused, abandoned, Belinda's heart hadn't completely hardened. Malaya, I've always thought of you as a great mom. And if you got in too deep and things got out of hand, it's okay. Things can be fixed. We just need to bring the kids home. She didn't want revenge. She didn't even want apologies. She just wanted to know her grandbabies were safe. But every time she reached out, she was met with silence, or worse, rejection. She even tried calling Patty, the maternal grandmother of Jack and Lily, hoping for answers. But as soon as she said her name, the line went dead. Nobody wanted to talk. Nobody wanted to help. Belinda has cycled through hope, fury, compassion, and heartbreak. She no longer knows who Malaya really is. Once, she was family. Now she's a stranger with her grandchildren's fate, buried somewhere inside her. And, until she speaks, until the silence is broken, Belinda is left holding on to memories of the mother Malaya used to be, and praying that version of her, however small, still exists. For Darren, his view of Malaya is steeped in betrayal, fury, and unshakable suspicion. The anger he feels toward her is not subtle, it burns through his words with raw intensity. At one point, he openly says he wants to nail Malaya to a tree until she talks. A statement that doesn't just express frustration, but a deep belief that she's hiding something terrible. He doesn't mince words. He thinks the police are making a huge mistake by not arresting her and putting pressure on her to confess. To Darren, she wouldn't last long under real questioning. I'm pretty sure Malaya couldn't take that pressure for very long, he says, as if he knows there's guilt locked inside her, and all it takes is someone willing to break past the shield she's hiding behind. What makes this even more painful for Darren is that Malaya isn't just anyone, she's family. This is my family that I'm nailing, he says, not with pride, but with a heavy heart. He doesn't want it to be true. He doesn't want to be the one who has to bring this kind of thing to light. But the weight of what happened to the children, Jack and Lily, is heavier than blood. He knows people might see him as disloyal or even cruel. But to him, not speaking out would be worse. He even says, if I'm wrong, well, I don't think I'm wrong, but I might be making little ones. Mistakes, you'll be disowned. Aaron, if this is incorrect, well, buddy, I'm already disowned. That line hits hard. It shows just how alone he feels, how far gone he is from his family, and how committed he is to doing what he believes is right. As mentioned, Darren didn't always see Malaya as the one responsible. In fact, for the first 3 weeks, he was focused on Daniel, the children's father. And then there was Malaya's own message. Why isn't Daniel looking for my kids? That line, to Darren, was damning. If she believed Daniel didn't do it, then who did she think was responsible? To him, that was a crack in the wall, a sign that she knew something more. That in itself means she doesn't believe Daniel did anything, Darren says. So that means probably likely that Malaya did something. From that point on, the pieces started falling into place. Darren began to believe that Malaya didn't just know something. She played a direct role. He proposed that she might have walked the kids out to the end of the road, the only place where someone could have taken them without being seen. He suggests she could have walked them to the end of the road. The only way someone could have picked them up without being seen is if someone walked them out there. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't someone sneaking into the house. Darren was imagining a planned handoff. Something intentional. Something dark. In the end, Darren and Belinda stood on different ends of the emotional spectrum, staring at the same woman through lenses, shaped by pain, betrayal, and unanswered questions. Darren saw Malaya as a threat, someone who had crossed a line so unforgivable, he could no longer see her as family. His trust was gone, replaced by a burning need for justice, no matter how brutal. Belinda, meanwhile, was suspended in disbelief, her heart still searching for reasons to hold on to the image of the caring mother she once knew. While Darren demanded punishment, Belinda wrestled with uncertainty. But despite their differences, both shared the same unbearable ache, 2 children gone, and no peace until the truth came out. For an update about Malaya, one of the most disturbing moments in the case of Jack and Lily Sullivan came not from a forensic discovery or police press conference, but from a seemingly casual social post. Their mother, Malaya Brook-Murray, appeared in a photo at the beach, sunlit, smiling, and completely relaxed, despite the fact that her 2 young children were still missing. The image, fleeting and quickly screenshotted before it disappeared, sparked an immediate firestorm across social media. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. While a massive search was underway for her children, Malaya was out enjoying the sun, looking happy as a clam. As one furious relative put it, the reaction was swift and severe. Jill Moore, a woman believed to be a relative of Malaya, took to social media to say, "Could you imagine your kids missing, and instead of helping and doing everything in your power to find them, you're on the beach happy as a clam? I am sick." Others followed, with one commenter accusing her of knowing exactly what happened to her children. "She definitely does know," the user wrote, escalating what had been public skepticism into a more serious and damaging accusation. In the midst of the backlash, someone close to Malaya, identified as Cheryl, attempted to defend her. Cheryl confirmed that she had taken Malaya out for the day, explaining that her friend needed a day out. She insisted Malaya wasn't guilty and definitely doesn't know what happened, though she also admitted she couldn't say much until the investigation was over. Her tone was sympathetic, even pleading, arguing that Malaya is still human, and being depressed at home all day crying isn't going to change anything. It was a line meant to humanize Malaya, to remind people that regardless of public opinion, she was still a person in pain. But the internet didn't buy it. The same user who posted the image was quick to respond, "Maybe continue to help with the search." They snapped back, "I wouldn't be posting myself happy as a clam on the beach. Don't let her fool you, she definitely does know." Absolutely disgusting. The exchange, now public, laid bare the core of the controversy, whether Malaya was a grieving mother coping in her own way, or a woman hiding a dark truth behind a beach day smile. The source of the image only fueled the controversy. The platform is known for its disappearing messages and images, often used for quick, private sharing. That someone had the presence of mind to screenshot it before it vanished gives the image an almost illicit weight. It's not just a photo, it's a moment that wasn't supposed to be preserved, and its survival adds to the sense that Malaya was caught, exposed. The fact that Cheryl acknowledged the image and engaged in defending Malaya publicly further confirms its authenticity. It wasn't taken out of context. It wasn't old. It was recent. And it happened while 2 little kids were still missing. The exchange itself unfolded like a digital courtroom, with Cheryl as Malaya's self-appointed defense, and a crowd of strangers acting as the jury and the prosecution. Cheryl, either the person who took the photo or one of those present that day, tried to paint Malaya as a misunderstood woman under pressure. But the rest of the internet wasn't having it. The reactions ranged from disbelief to white-hot anger. Not just because of the image, but because of what it symbolized, a mother seemingly unbothered while her children vanished without a trace. At its core, the debate ignited by the photo reveals 2 sharply opposed worldviews. One side argues for empathy, that Malaya, like anyone, deserves to breathe, to cope, to exist even under unbearable circumstances. The other side sees her behavior as a moral outrage, the kind of reaction only possible from someone hiding guilt. The dialogue reads like a moral standoff, not just about what happened to Jack and Lily, but about what it means to be a mother when your children are gone. And then came the final groan. I just hope those babies are safe and never in her custody again. Never. That single sentence, dropped like a gavel at the end of the conversation, said it all. For many watching from the sidelines, Malaya was no longer just a questionable figure. She had crossed a line. Regardless of legal outcomes, public opinion had cast its verdict. She was unfit, unforgivable, a mother in title only, and the beach photo, now frozen in screenshot, stood as proof. Jane Martell. Janie lived in a trailer tucked away from the main road, a place that gave her privacy but also kept her out of sight. She was a strong woman. People around her said it without hesitation. Stubborn, sharp, independent. She didn't take bullshit, and she didn't need anyone to stand up for her. But the thing about Janie was, despite that hardened shell, she hated the spotlight. She avoided it like the plague. Speaking in front of crowds. Not her thing. She got nervous, clammed up, especially after everything that happened. The media, the online vultures, they tore into her like she was hiding something. Lights in her yard at night. Cameras in her face. She kicked them out more than once, told them to leave her the hell alone. And they didn't listen. It wore her down, made her even more reclusive. Still, there was a fire in her. A sense of right and wrong. So when she saw people twisting the truth, accusing others, she couldn't sit back anymore. That anger, that deep, shaking fury, pushed her closer to doing the one thing she never wanted to, speak up in public. Maybe for the first time, she wasn't just some bystander in the story of Jack and Lily. Janie was one of the first people who stepped forward when it all went down. On May 2nd, early in the morning, she told the RCMP what she heard, under oath, the sound of the back door, the kids' voices. Not imagined, not assumed. She swore she heard them alive that Friday morning around 9:30 a.m. Her account wasn't vague or sketchy. It was detailed. Time-stamped. She had it all recorded in her phone, calls, noises, what she did, what she saw. She wasn't making wild claims on Facebook. She went to the damn police. The Northeastern Major Crime Unit got her statement. It was real. Still, she stayed silent for a long time after that. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't trust people. She didn't trust the way they manipulated facts, or how they threw around blame without knowing the full story. She waited, listened. When Daniel came around and started talking, she sat and listened to him, too. Twice. That's all it took. Something about the way he spoke, the things he said. It made her decide. She handed everything over to Darren. Every note. Every thought. Every memory. Because she wanted the truth out there. But not twisted. Her role wasn't limited to just a few sounds in the morning. Janie pointed out where she saw Malaya walking with the child. She showed where she had scooped gravel the day before. The way the car doors shut. The way the dog barked right after. It all aligned. It all matched what Daniel had been saying. And Daniel hadn't even known she'd said anything yet. 2 accounts. Same story. Without coordination. That meant something. Janie's interaction with the cops was no different from the way she handled everything else. Direct and firm. When officers came to search her place, she didn't put up a fight. She said fine. But she had a warning for them. You go in, that's on you. My dog's tied up. If it bites you, that's your damn fault. That's how she said it. And after they left, she reminded Malaya to keep that dog secure if they ever came back. She didn't want the dog getting hurt. That was Janie. No frills. Just blunt but protective in her own way. Her personal life wasn't simple, either. There was Earl, an older man who'd been around her place that same day the narrator showed up. Belinda confirmed he was Janie's husband. Or maybe ex-husband. No one seemed to know if they were still together, but it was clear there had been something between them. Earl didn't say much. Just hello, how are you, at the door. But he was there. Later it came out he was Daniel's father, making Janie the mother. That put her at the heart of the case in more ways than one. And then there was Justin, maybe a tenant, maybe more. Malaya referred to them as they when talking about who lived in the trailer out back. I don't know if Justin was still living there then, she'd said. That made people wonder, was Janie living with Justin? No one had a clear answer. But the possibility was enough to raise questions about who saw what. And yet, even with all that, people trusted her. Darren especially. He said Janie was the reason he changed his mind. Said he'd been leaning toward suspecting Daniel, until Janie's timeline turned everything upside down. Others backed her too. Called her a stand-up woman. Honest, unafraid to speak hard truths. Belinda, Daniel, Darren, they all said the same thing. If Janie said something, she meant it. Still, not everyone believed her right away. Some wondered why she hadn't come forward sooner, why she stayed so quiet. But maybe they didn't understand what it's like to be hunted for a story you never wanted to tell. Now, things are shifting. That silence she clung to so tightly is starting to crack. Because she's angry. Not scared, not shy, angry. Angry at how people distorted her words. Angry that the truth she gave in good faith was ignored. And if that anger is enough to get her to speak, really speak, it'll be a moment this whole case turns on. Because Janie's not just a witness. She might be the one holding the thread that unravels the whole thing. Darren Gettys. Darren is a man living on the edge, figuratively and literally. Once a stable figure within his family and community, he now spends his nights inside an old Honda. The only shelter left to his name, after losing his truck and, shortly after, his home. His decision to speak out about the case of the missing children, Jack and Lily, cost him everything. His family turned their backs on him. His own son attacked him, twice, furious that the online attention had brought strangers to their home, confusing Darren's grandchildren with the missing kids. It wasn't just rejection he faced, it was exile. And yet, Darren never backed down. Despite the hostility, Darren claims he did it for the children. His words carry the weight of a man deeply wounded, not just by personal loss, but by a sense of helplessness. He often says he loves kids, maybe more than anything else, and the fact that 2 small lives could vanish without answers has left him shaken, broken even. He wears his heart on his sleeve. In his own words, I wear my damn heart on my sleeve, and I go full metal jacket when I believe someone's lying. Many who've watched him speak online have seen that vulnerability spill out in real time, tears, outbursts, shouting, trembling hands. He's not polished, he's not perfect. But he's there, and he's loud. Darren wasn't always convinced of what he believes now. In the early days, even his own household whispered that Daniel might be responsible for the kids' disappearance. But Darren didn't settle for whispers. He investigated on his own, spent 3 full weeks chasing leads, talking to neighbors, analyzing timelines. And eventually, he changed his mind. "It doesn't add up," he said. "None of it points to him." That shift didn't just make him a loud voice online. It made him a threat to people who didn't want the story rewritten. He's gone to the RCMP. He's knocked on doors. On a Saturday morning, when no one from the major crimes division would answer his calls, he drove out to the Stellarton detachment and demanded to speak to someone. He ended up sitting with 3 officers, giving them his account. At another point, he reached out to Cindy, Malaya's mother, and had a tense phone call with her. He heard Malaya's voice in the background, and that was enough for Darren to start connecting dots no one else seemed willing to touch. Cindy cut off communication soon after, telling Darren her daughter would have to deal with the consequences of her own actions. He says he knows who did it. He's not bluffing. Darren has a name. He's said that more than once, but refuses to say it out loud. He insists that going public could compromise the investigation or put someone in danger. And that's the line he won't cross, even when people accuse him of holding back, of playing games. Those accusations cut deep. He's been called a liar, a shit-stirrer, even a danger. But then again, others, people who've known the case from the inside, stand up for him. If you really listen, one supporter wrote, "You'll see that Darren's not trying to go viral. He's trying to get justice." He was the first person Janie spoke to when the pressure became too much. After being harassed by YouTubers, reporters, even strangers flashing lights into her yard, Janie shut herself off from everyone. Everyone but Darren. He says she broke down in front of him, shared her timeline, her notes, her truth. He was there when she said someone tried to bribe her for information. A muffin in exchange for a statement, as if her credibility was for sale. He was livid. Sometimes Darren drives hours to meet people. One night, he spent 2 hours sitting at Belinda's place because she had no car to come to him. That's just who he is. Imperfect, impulsive, but relentless. "I'll strap on a steel helmet and march through hell if it means helping those kids," he once said on a live stream. "I don't give a damn if trolls call me names. Come say it to my face." Some details Darren shares are trivial to outsiders, but to him, they're puzzle pieces. Like the time Janie filled hole with gravel the night before the kids went missing. Or rumors about a pink boot found under a couch. He says that part's probably false, but it matters to track what people believe and why. He connects every dot he can. And if you watch closely, you can tell it's not for attention. It's an obsession. It's grief. Darren's not a hero. He'd be the first to admit it. He's flawed, angry, sometimes even irrational. But he's also one of the only people still shouting when everyone else has gone quiet. He still believes there's a truth out there, and even if he has to yell it from a cold car in the middle of a Canadian winter, he's not going to shut up until someone listens. In this case, the most unsettling part isn't the lack of evidence, or even the suspicions circling the parents. It's the deafening silence from the police, and the overwhelming noise from a community desperate to fill that silence with anything it can find. Belinda Gray has emerged as the only family member who actively searched for the missing children. Her actions sharply contrast the indifference shown by the children's mother, Malaya Brooks. From the beginning, Belinda has expressed deep skepticism toward the RCMP and their handling of the case. She believes the authorities have either neglected their duties or are willfully ignoring critical leads. Her distrust in law enforcement has led her to take matters into her own hands, speaking openly to the media and sharing information on social media in hopes of rallying public support. She suspects that something is being hidden, that there are truths left untouched, and she has made it clear she won't stay silent. Belinda's response to the public has been just as fierce. Upon seeing a widely circulated photo of Malaya smiling in a bikini at the beach, just days after her children vanished, Belinda was deeply offended. She described the image as shocking, even revolting, and said it showed a complete lack of conscience. That moment, for many, solidified the belief that Malaya was not acting like a grieving mother. In contrast, Belinda's visible sorrow and her tireless efforts to find her grandchildren have earned her widespread sympathy. The public has largely sided with her, viewing her as the only sincere voice of heartbreak and urgency in a case filled with silence and suspicion. Darren presents a starkly different viewpoint. Unlike Belinda, he has never criticized the RCMP. Instead, his focus has been almost entirely on defending Daniel from public suspicion. Darren has made numerous appearances on social media platforms, declaring Daniel's innocence and framing him as another victim of the situation. At the same time, he has been vocal in blaming Malaya, insisting that she is the one responsible or at least hiding something. His relentless defense of Daniel, however, has raised eyebrows. Many in the community and online believe Darren's loyalty might be clouding his judgment, or worse, that he may be part of an effort to obscure the truth. The host of the original video and several viewers have expressed concern that Darren seems to know far more than someone outside the immediate household should. His repeated involvement and strong opinions, delivered with unwavering confidence, have left some wondering if his role is more than just that of a friend. In the absence of clear answers from law enforcement, voices like Belinda's and Darren's have become central to the public narrative, each representing opposing sides of a story still buried in uncertainty. The disappearance of Jack and Lilly Sullivan has become more than just a tragic case of two missing children. It has evolved into a public spectacle, one fueled by frustration, fear, and an overwhelming desire for justice. But in the process, we've also seen how easily narratives can spin out of control when answers are scarce and emotions run high. From the silence of law enforcement has been one of the most jarring aspects. When a tragedy like this unfolds, people expect swift updates, visible urgency, and clear leadership. But when days turn into weeks without resolution, that silence becomes deafening and dangerous. In its absence, speculation thrives. Everyone becomes a detective, a judge, a prosecutor. The line between truth and assumption blurs. That's exactly what's happened here. On the other end of the spectrum, we've seen a community that refuses to stay silent. From viral videos to heated social media posts, people have poured their energy into solving this mystery themselves. And while that speaks to a powerful sense of shared concern, it also raises a serious question. When does concern become harmful? When does public outrage start to look less like advocacy and more like vigilantism? It's easy to point fingers at Malaya for her beach photo, at Daniel for standing by her, at Darren for his unwavering loyalty, even at Cody for his perceived absence. But judgment based on partial stories, screenshots, or secondhand accounts can do irreversible harm. What if we're wrong? What if the narrative we've constructed isn't the truth at all? What if we're watching a family unravel under the weight of trauma, and our assumptions are only tightening the noose? Each person involved in this case, whether it's the parents, the grandmother, the friends, or even the online voices, deserves more than our judgment. They deserve our patience. They deserve the benefit of the doubt until real, verifiable facts come to light. Because behind every suspicious post or strange decision may be grief, shock, or a kind of psychological collapse that none of us can see from the outside. This is not a call to ignore red flags or stop asking questions. It's a reminder to proceed with empathy. To recognize that real lives are at stake, not just the children's, but everyone connected to them. It's a plea to respect the process, flawed as it may sometimes feel. Law enforcement may be slow, but it is still the institution charged with seeking justice. Until they speak with certainty, no one else can. And most importantly, this is a time to focus on what matters most: Jack and Lilly. Two innocent children who vanished without a trace. Before we argue over guilt or innocence, before we share another theory or screenshot, let's remember why we're even paying attention. This isn't about proving we were right. It's about hoping they come home. So pray for them. Hope for them. And until we know more, let's choose compassion over judgment, facts over fury, and humanity over hearsay.